What is up, gamers? It's your boy, terrible game designer and reviewer here, and today I'm gonna be talking about Ticket to Ride Europe, this masterpiece. So what is up with Ticket to Ride Europe? Ticket to Ride Europe is the direct sequel to the original Ticket to Ride game and has the highest rating on BoardGameGeek, which means that it must be the best one. Europe is a standalone expansion, so it comes with its own trains, board, and cards. Europe, like every other expansion of Ticket to Ride, falls into one of two categories for me. The first, which Europe falls into, are bigger expansions that don't change the core game that much. Other examples of this first category are Germany and Nordic countries. The second type of expansion are smaller ones that change the fundamental gameplay of the game. Examples of these are Heart of Africa, United Kingdom, and Team Asia. I lied in the intro by saying that Europe is a better game than the original because honestly, it's not objectively better. Europe, in my opinion, is different mostly because it gives the players more choice. Europe expands on the original game by giving the player options that they previously didn't have. It's odd to say that because in the original there weren't many things that were out of the player's control in the first place. The best way that I can put it is that Europe takes the luck and strategy from the original game and changes where it is. To begin talking about this, let's talk about the new mechanics. The biggest differences in Ticket to Ride Europe, other than the board being Europe obviously, are three new mechanics: long and short routes, ferries/tunnels, and stations. The long and short route mechanic is used at the start of the game. In the original Ticket, you'd get 3 route cards and you have to keep 2 of them. In Europe, you draw 1 long route and 3 short routes and have to keep 2 of them. This is the only time you're going to be able to pull some crazy cross-continental route. These are the only routes that are worth around 21 to 24 points. Every other route in the game that you'll be able to pull after this are worth usually 7 to 12 points. This mechanic, in my opinion, is a huge improvement on the original system. It allows the player to better plan out their game plan for the game and was one of the biggest factors of luck in the original. This is the first instance of luck being taken out and getting put somewhere else in the game. Some luck was removed from drawing routes later in the game because the only time you could draw those crazy cross-continental routes is at the start of the game. So if you draw new routes after completing your long route, you will draw with more confidence than you would in the original game. Overall, I think this system is objectively better than the original games. The second mechanic I want to talk about are the stations. At the start of the game, you get 3 stations along with your trains. For one of your turns, you may place down a station. The first station you place costs 1 of any card, the second is 2 of the same card, and the third is 3 of the same card. Stations get placed in cities and can be used to use a route another player has already claimed for your own route card. So for example, let's say that you had a route card going from Berlin to Moscow, but someone had already taken the route from Smolensk to Moscow, and you're not trying to go all the way around to get there. You can place a station on Smolensk, or Moscow to use another player's route to complete your route card. This mechanic has mixed reception. The main complaint of it is that it reduces the tension of strategy when you want to block another player because you can just place a tunnel down instead. This mechanic is definitely up to personal preference, and I can see both sides of the coin. One thing that I think a lot of people don't think about when discussing this mechanic is the inherent inefficiency of using one of these. An important detail I haven't mentioned yet is that at the end of the game, you get +4 points for each station that you do not use. So at the start of the game, every player actually has an extra 12 points in the bank. Let's return to my example of someone placing a station down to complete their route to Moscow. This player has lost 4 points compared to every other player already if they haven't used a station. That player also doesn't get the 2 points for taking this route, so it's another -2 points. Just from this station alone, this player has lost 6 points. So a route going from Berlin to Moscow, usually a 12-point route, is really only worth half of its original points. Keep in mind that this is for a 2-length route as well. It gets worse as the length goes up. And of course, you're not really losing the points, but you're losing on potential points. To compare the station's effect in Europe and America, I would like to refer to a post called "Why I Would Never Recommend Ticket to Ride Europe to Anyone," which I'll be referring to a few times in this video, and it's actually a really good read. I'll link it in the description. The author states that using stations in the original game will unbalance it because Vegas and Boston are supposed to be difficult to get to. He is completely right in saying this, but I think them existing without any counterbalance is luck in itself. To counter-argue his point, I don't think that every block in the original game is completely skill based. For example, someone can literally take LA to Vegas turn 1 without even trying to block you with their opening hand, and there is nothing you can do about it. Very rarely have I ever seen someone take LA to Vegas without taking Vegas to Salt Lake City as well. So if you draw Vegas in a route card later in the game where this has happened, 1/3 of your draw is essentially trash, which is complete luck. This isn't to say that the author is wrong. I think he has a very valid point, but I also think that there's two sides to the same coin. So in conclusion, stations are another example of luck and strategy being changed in the game. The original map is about getting to where you need to go as quickly as possible, while Europe is about optimizing what you have and choking your opponents out of points. The last big change that Europe added to Ticket comes with claiming routes. There are two new types of routes in Europe, the first of which are ferries. Ferries are routes that have locomotive symbols on a few of their spaces. All this indicates is that you need that many locomotives in order to take that route. This is another change that I think is objectively good. It helps card flow because the locomotives will actually be taken instead of taking up space. More card flow helps people get the cards they actually need, which will allow them to take from the top less, which means there's less luck. Give me a degree Harvard because I'm a mechanical genius. In all seriousness though, I do think that ferries help with card flow, so I just think that's a good thing. The second type of route added, and the much more controversial one, are the tunnels. People despise the tunnels. A tunnel route is indicated by the borders that go around them. In order to take a tunnel route, you need to draw 3 cards from the top of the draw pile. For each extra card of the same color or locomotive that is flipped face up, you need to play an extra card of that color or locomotive. If you cannot do this, you cannot take the route. So let's just say, for example, you wanted to take Marseille to Zurich, which is a simple 2 pink or purple, whatever your preference is, length route, and you top deck 1 purple, 1 locomotive, and 1 yellow. If you don't have 2 additional pinks or 2 additional locomotives to play, you cannot take that route, and if you do, then you could play those 2 to take that route. The main argument against this mechanic, which I'll also be taking from Why I Would Never Recommend Ticket to Ride Europe to Anyone, is basically that it is, and I quote, "You can't work around the tunnels if you want to win, and you will also waste turns taking them." I highly suggest you pause the video and read this entire paragraph because it is very well thought out. The first time I played this game, I absolutely agreed with everything the author is saying here. I hated the tunnels, and I wasted half the game going for a tunnel that was literally like a length of 2. To me, it seemed completely unnecessary to add any luck to a game where you can neglect most luck with smart play. It seemed just like a stupid, silly added mechanic, and I completely see why people hate these. That being said, upon playing more games, the tunnels have bothered me less and less. Firstly, I don't think it's a cardinal sin for the game to add a bit of luck to it. After all, you need a decent amount of luck to win in the first place. In some games, you need mostly luck to win it all. Secondly, taking extra cards of the same color can often be beneficial to you. If you don't end up spending the cards that you have gained, you can use them for gray routes later. On the map as well, you can see that many of the tunnels are on the left corner of the board. Near here are a lot of gray routes, so it is useful to collect extra to possibly take those routes later. Another possible strategy, and this is like really out there, is collecting a lot of cards to the point where you're basically hoarding a color. It makes certain colors harder to come by for other players. Basically throws off the probability of the entire game. I don't know if that's a legitimate strategy or not, but whatever, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there. I'd say that personally, I don't mind this mechanic that much. However, as a game designer, I would say that it is a weak point of the game. I think there are smarter ways to implement this mechanic, possibly adding extra tunnel cards in the deck. The Switzerland map, in my opinion, does them a lot better. You can take locomotives as regular cards in that game, but you can only use them for tunnels. In my opinion, that's an improvement on this system. So you might be asking why this mechanic was even implemented in the first place, and I have a hypothesis for that I don't know has any legitimacy, but as a game designer, this makes sense to me. In Europe, you just have way more choices than you did in the original game. The long routes basically cut the map into certain areas, which I'll go more into later, but it makes it so that there's less of a cluster because there's only 6 of those cards. So there's basically 6 routed out strategies that don't completely fight against each other. So that declutters it a lot. The stations allow you to not really block people, so that makes it a little bit easier as well, taking away some of that really harsh strategy or really harsh luck as well. And the fairies make drawing cards a lot easier because some people are required to take locomotives and they won't sit there. Because of these new mechanics that essentially take what used to be very difficult about the game and make them much more manageable, I think Alan R. Moon kind of decided to just say, fuck it, and add something into the game that could essentially screw you over and change everything. Whether that's good or not, I think that's why it's there. Personally, I think they're fun, but implemented pretty poorly in this edition, like I said before. I think a better way to do it would to be have tunnel cards that are essentially locomotives, but you can take them like normal cards and you can use them as locomotives for tunnels. So overall, implemented poorly, a lot of people dislike them, and I completely understand that. I think they're kind of whatever, take it or leave it. One idea that I'd like to expand more on is that the idea that long routes help cut the map into distinct strategies to promote a less cluttered board. This visual that I made shows each long route, albeit not at its most efficient for every player. I also routed out all 6 of the cards, and the maximum amount of players in the game is 5. This helps promote a more healthy board. In some of the other games, people will end up on one side of the board or the other, and that's kind of annoying. All of the routes run horizontally except for one, but the board is wide enough vertically to have all of the players fit in the board. The age-old question that every Ticket to Ride map has to answer is, am I going to be Rails and Sails? Just kidding, it's actually how do you balance long routes and short routes on the board? This is by far the biggest weakness of the American map. I've always felt that the West Coast cross-continental strat was the way to go. It just seemed way more efficient to get points by taking the 6 length routes and having your route cards score more. This isn't to say a lopsided board in terms of route length can't work, but it's certainly not optimal in that version. In Europe, Alan seems to have swayed away from the 5 and 6 length routes. In fact, there's only one of each of them on the board. This keeps the score during the game a lot tighter, which is something that I've always liked. Seeing your opponent run away from you, damn well knowing that your 2 short route cards are worth less than their 1 long route card is just a bad feeling. So this is a welcome change. The 8 length tunnel being on the top of the board is the perfect placement for it. This route is worth 21 points, which is the amount of points a long route is usually worth. So it being out of the way is good. If you do choose to run through it with your long route card, which I have done many times, you're not really running through a convenient part of the board when drawing new route cards. This is a great balance because yes, you will be essentially getting 2 long route cards completed, but it will be more difficult for you to complete any more routes. This game also has longest route, which is much more difficult to achieve in this game because of the stations. Stations break your route, which is a big punishment for using them. This is another reason to promote blocking still, so that players will be forced to break this continuous route, taking them out of contention for the longest route. Lastly, this game artistically is a lot nicer to look at than the original game. When I say the original game, I'm talking about the OG game, not the 10th anniversary edition or the 15th anniversary edition, which are both beautiful. I would assume. I haven't actually played the 15th anniversary edition, but I have the 10th, so the 15th should be pretty. The background of the original map is a whitish gray. It just feels a little uninspired to me. Europe distinguishes the water from the land, so the artist used a blue for the water and a brownish for the land. The colors of the actual routes seem to be a lot more distinct as well. The purple is a lot more purple than like it was in the original, where it looked a little pink. The red seems a little bit darker, making it way more crisp. Orange and yellow are more distinguished from each other in this one, it seems like. This could all just be hypothetical and I'm just imagining things, but the way that colors look on other colors, I just feel like it's just way easier to see them. To me, Ticket to Ride Europe almost reflects the cultural differences between America and Europe. Europe is a way more socialized place than we are here in America, and it is reflected in this game's mechanics. It has way more lifelines for players by giving them way more ways to work around previous problems. Some people see this as like the game being very noob friendly, making it the Ticket to Ride to play with beginners. While I agree that it is more beginner friendly, I disagree that all skill has been ripped from the game completely, which I don't really think people are arguing in the first place. This really leads me to one question. Which game is better, the original or Europe? You can approach this question in 2 ways. Which game I would prefer to play on a given day, which game I see as being better. Honestly, I think I'd rather play Europe. I think Europe is a much more laid back experience than the American map. I really like having everyone's scores pretty close together and giving everyone everyone the chance to get to where they need to go. I play this game a lot with my family, and I feel really guilty cutting my mom off intentionally. The stations make the board more fair for all players. Overall, this game stresses me out a lot less than some of the other editions, and I like that a lot. That being said, is this game as a design better than the original game? Honestly, I believe it is. I think there are parts of Europe that are better and worse than the original game, but overall, the better parts create a net positive of change, albeit it's a very small net positive. The long and short routes, ferries, and a more balanced board to me are no questions asked good additions to the game that improve on the original. The biggest of these three is the more balanced board. The American map has a lot more flaws and obviously advantageous cities, while the European board is much more balanced. The stations and tunnels are something that I'm indifferent to. I really like watching min-maxers get screwed over by the tunnels just as I did when I first started playing this game. They really changed the way you have to think about the game, which I find interesting. I'd say that both the American and European map are A tier, with Europe going just barely over America. While here, I'd like to point out my tier names. We have the regular S tier to whatever tier, because I haven't edited this yet, but there's also dumpster fire tier. Keep that in mind as I continue to review these games. And with that, that is all I have for all of you guys today. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I've been putting a lot of work into it. The next game I'll be reviewing is Switzerland, I believe. I believe that is the next one. What do you guys think? Do you prefer the American map or the European one? Super tight for me. I really feel like it could go either way. For this video, I feel like I really had to choose one. So thank you all for watching. If you have gotten to this point, I really appreciate it. And I'll see you next time. Peace.